One day in Antarctica, a team of American researchers was drilling for deep ice core samples. The scientists were Jack and his two colleagues, Frank and Jason. Suddenly, the ice around them began to fracture. The ground split in two, and Jason almost fell into the chasm. Luckily, Jack and Frank managed to save him, with Jack making a daring leap across the divide to rescue their research samples. At a UN conference in New Delhi, Jack presented his findings from Antarctica. The topic was global warming and its role in causing drastic climate shifts across the globe. But based on a previously observed phenomenon, he theorized the opposite could happen. Global warming could trigger a new ice age. Stepping outside the conference hall, an unprecedented sight greeted them. Snow was falling on the streets of New Delhi. After the conference, Jack was approached by a Scottish oceanography professor named Terry. Professor Terry wanted to discuss Jack's theory further over tea. Meanwhile, at a climate research center in Scotland, a member of Professor Terry's team noticed a significant temperature drop registered by one of their data buoys in the North Atlantic. However, other crew members dismissed it as a common malfunction, likely caused by the buoy being damaged in a storm. In Tokyo, shopkeepers were preparing to close due to a severe weather warning. Without warning, a hailstorm with massive chunks of ice pummeled the city, causing widespread panic among the locals. Back in Washington, D.C., Jack called home and spoke to his wife, Lucy, a doctor. They discussed their son, Sam, who had just received an F in calculus, despite being the smartest student in his class. Lucy also reminded Jack to take Sam to the airport the next morning at 8:30 a.m. Sam was representing his school, Woodmont, at a quiz bowl competition in New York. The next day, on the way to the airport, Jack asked about the failing grade. Sam explained that he had all the correct answers but hadn't written down the work on the test paper. He'd done it all in his head. He also felt his teacher was threatened by his intelligence. Meanwhile, astronauts on the International Space Station observed alarming weather patterns forming, predicting a massive storm system was imminent. On the flight to New York, Sam was visibly frightened when lightning struck near the plane. His two teammates, Laura and Brian, tried to calm him as the plane began to shake violently from the intense turbulence. Back in the Scottish lab, Professor Terry discovered something was seriously wrong. A second buoy was now reporting a 13-degree drop in ocean temperature. With 3 buoys now showing the same anomaly, it was clear this wasn't a simple malfunction. Upon arriving in New York, Sam and his friends found themselves stuck in gridlock traffic. They decided to walk the rest of the way to the competition. In the sky above, flocks of birds were behaving erratically, a sign that something was wrong. All around the city, animals were acting strangely and agitated, as if sensing an impending disaster. In the first round of the competition, Sam's school, Woodmont, was neck and neck with the host school, Pinehurst Academy. A boy named J.D. from Pinehurst was caught staring at Laura from across the room, making Sam, who had a crush on her, instantly jealous. During a break, J.D. confidently introduced himself to Laura and asked her out. Brian teased Sam, saying he had serious competition, noting that J.D. was not only a standout contestant but also probably rich. Following disasters in India and Japan, the United States was now hit. Los Angeles was pummeled by golf ball-sized hail, and multiple tornadoes formed with terrifying speed, devastating the city. The damage was catastrophic, with many casualties.
Is anyone hurt? I couldn't be sure. What you're seeing are Twister in Los Angeles.
Sam and the other contestants watched the news coverage in horror. To prevent further casualties, the FAA grounded all flights across the United States. A national emergency task force, which included Jack, convened to assess the situation. Jack warned that the storm system was likely to worsen and that humanity was on the brink of a major climatic shift. Jack's boss at NOAA gave him 48 hours to finalize his climate change theory report for the government. Jack, Frank, Jason, and a NASA scientist named Janet Tokata worked tirelessly, concluding that global climate chaos would reach its peak in just 6 to 8 weeks. Meanwhile, in New York, relentless rain for 3 days caused severe flooding, crippling transportation and submerging streets. Sam was stranded at Pinehurst Academy with the other competitors. Jack urged his son to come home immediately, but it was impossible. J.D. offered Sam, Laura, and Brian a place to stay at his family's apartment. The situation in Washington, D.C., where Jack was, remained stable for the time being. Citizens, however, were beginning to stockpile supplies as the situation deteriorated. Jack and his superiors presented their findings on the impending superstorm to the vice president. The VP insisted they were fully prepared for the storm, but Jack urged for a large-scale evacuation to begin immediately. The vice president, still skeptical of the extreme climate threat, was not ready to authorize such a drastic measure. Jack then received a report from Professor Terry. Several helicopters had crashed in Scotland after flying into the heart of the storm. They had frozen solid almost instantly due to a drastic sudden temperature drop. Sam and his friends made it to JD's luxurious family apartment, which they used as a weekend pied a terra. They watched the news for updates as the crisis unfolded. JD decided to go pick up his younger sister from her tutor in Philadelphia, while Sam, Laura, and Brian planned to hitch a ride with him to the train station, hoping some lines were still running. However, JD's driver was also stuck in the now gridlocked, flood-choked streets. Elsewhere, zookeepers made their rounds, only to discover that the timber wolves had escaped their enclosure. Lucy, still on duty at the hospital, monitored the situation with her colleagues. On the road, Sam and his friends found themselves trapped by rapidly rising floodwaters. Sam suggested they head for higher ground. They decided to take shelter in the public library. In the chaos, Laura's foot got stuck and she was injured. As they waded through the flooded streets, Laura spotted a mother and child trapped in their car. Without hesitation, she went to help them. Her friends grew worried as Laura fell behind and a large wave approached. Seeing the danger, Sam rushed back and saved Laura. They all made it to safety just in time, climbing to the top floors of the library as the city of New York sank beneath the floodwaters. Jack and his team, after analyzing the latest data from Professor Terry, reached a terrifying conclusion. The end of this storm would transform the planet, plunging it into a new ice age. Jack urged Professor Terry and his team to evacuate Scotland immediately, but the professor refused, feeling there was more work to be done. His final plea to Jack was to save as many people as possible, and to do it quickly, before the cataclysm grew even worse. Inside the New York Public Library, the survivors had no way to contact their families with the power out. Laura thanked Sam for risking his life to save her. Sam and Laura then ventured downstairs to try a hardline payphone connected to the underground network. To their relief, it was still working. After hearing the news about the chaos in New York, Lucy went to find Jack. They were desperately worried about Sam, with whom they had lost all contact. Suddenly, the phone rang. It was Sam. He explained their situation just as the rising floodwaters nearly submerged him and the phone booth. Jack advised him that it was now too late to try and evacuate south. The freezing front would hit them on the road, flash freezing anyone caught in it. His only chance was to hunker down, burn anything he could find for warmth, and wait for help. Jack promised he would come for Sam no matter what. The line went dead as the water swallowed the booth, but Sam managed to fight his way back to safety and change into dry coats they found in the library. The storm surge was so immense that a massive cargo ship had been carried by the currents and was now stranded in the streets of Manhattan. The refugees in the library, including Sam and his friends, watched the surreal sight in disbelief. Back in D.C., Jack prepared Arctic-grade gear to brave the storm and rescue his son. Before he could leave, his boss ordered him to brief the central government one more time. This time, officials were finally convinced. Jack urged them to tell people to save themselves by heading south. The further south, the safer from the storm's epicenter. The president made the agonizing decision to follow this plan. The military would not be sent north, as it would only lead to more casualties. Those in the north were left to fend for themselves, while everyone else would be evacuated south. In the Scottish lab, Professor Terry and his team resigned themselves to riding out the violent storm. With only tea and biscuits left, their fuel was gone and the power, and with it, the heat was about to fail. They could only huddle together, sharing their final messages and hopes for their families. Back at the library, the refugees saw the mass exodus of people fleeing the city for the south. A security guard announced that they, too, should leave. But Sam objected, stating that his father was a top government climatologist who had specifically warned them to stay put and shelter from the killing cold. The group was split. Some followed the guard south, while others trusted Sam and stayed in the relative safety of the library. At Lucy's hospital, patients were being evacuated to safer ground in Mexico to escape the flash freeze. Meanwhile, Jason and Frank voluntarily agreed to accompany Jack on the suicidal mission to drive to New York. The sheer number of refugees overwhelmed the system, forcing the Mexican government to close its border with the U.S. Desperate, frustrated Americans broke through illegally, fording the river into Mexico. The U.S. government lobbied Mexico to reopen the border, even offering to forgive the nation's debt in exchange for help. Finally, the border was reopened. Those who stayed in the library began gathering books to burn in the grand fireplace, a desperate measure to keep warm. They also pooled all the food they could find to ration for survival. Elsewhere, Lucy was forced to stay behind with a young patient while everyone else was evacuated. The ambulance meant for them never arrived. The refugees who had left the library faced a grim fate. The cold was unbearable, and many had already frozen to death, ill-equipped for the storm. Those still alive were filled with regret, realizing they should have stayed in the warmth of the library. Their experience was a world apart from Sam's group, who, while still cold, had a roaring fire, endless fuel from the books, and warm coats. Jack and his team were still en route from Washington, D.C. to New York. The journey was terrifying, with whiteout conditions and roads buried in snow. They relied solely on their radar, guided by Jason. Suddenly, their vehicle crashed into a snowdrift, forcing them to continue on foot with their exploration gear. Disaster struck when a sled carrying their vital supplies broke loose and fell into a crevasse. Frank, who was attached to it, was pulled down. Jason held on for dear life, but there was nothing Jack could do. Frank made the ultimate sacrifice, cutting himself loose to save his friends. They were left in stunned silence, mourning their friend before pressing on. That night, Sam found Laura shivering, unable to sleep. He tried to distract her with conversation. Laura felt hopeless, believing that the future they had been working for was meaningless now that civilization was collapsing. Sam tried to lift her spirits and confess the truth he'd been hiding. The only reason he joined the Quiz Bowl team was to be closer to her. Meanwhile, at the refugee camps in Mexico, aid workers began setting up soup kitchens to feed the masses. The U.S. president himself was one of the last to be evacuated from the White House. He was consumed with worry for the citizens he was leaving behind. Tragically, his motorcade became stuck in the snow, and everyone in it perished. The next morning, Laura wouldn't wake up. The others realized the cut on her leg had become infected. A woman with medical knowledge said they needed to find penicillin or another antibiotic, or Laura would die. Sam, Brian, and JD braved the storm to reach the stranded cargo ship. They managed to find medical supplies and scavenge leftover food from the ship's cafeteria. But a pack of starving wolves, escaped from the zoo, caught their scent. The wolves attacked, badly injuring JD's leg before the boys could fight them off. They became trapped in a room, with the wolves waiting outside. Sam devised an escape through a window, and they managed to pull the injured JD to safety on an inflatable raft. The eye of the storm, which had been over Canada, was now moving south, directly over New York. Jack, realizing what was happening, desperately sought shelter, dragging a hypothermic and unconscious Jason into a building. Sam and his group also raced inside, barricading the door just as the deadly freeze flash froze the world outside. They stoked the fire with more books, fighting to keep the life-giving flames alive. Hours passed, and Jason finally regained consciousness. With renewed determination, Jack urged him to continue their journey. The storm's core had passed. This was their only window. They bravely stepped out of their shelter and navigated the unrecognizable streets. The once bustling cities were now silent, icy tombs. And on their journey, a horrifying sight greeted them. The frozen bodies of those who had tried to flee, captured in their final, desperate poses. A stark reminder of nature's brutal fury when unleashed. That night, inside their tent lit by emergency lamps, they talked. Millions of lives had been lost, but humanity was not extinct. In the Ice Age tens of thousands of years ago, our ancestors survived with nothing but stone tools and fire. This time we would survive again. At the same time, a formal report was transmitted from the International Space Station to the central camp in Mexico. The storm over North America was finally beginning to subside. The prediction had been right. The next morning, when Jack and Jason unzipped their tent, a miracle greeted them. The sun was shining brightly for the first time since the terrifying storm began. The library they were trying to reach was almost unrecognizable, buried under thick snow with only a narrow gap to enter. With hearts pounding, Jack navigated the dark, frozen hallways. Finally, from behind a door, they saw it. A sliver of warm, flickering firelight escaping from the cracks. They were finally reunited amidst the millions who had perished in the storm. Jack immediately contacted his superiors via radio, reporting that there were still survivors in the north. With the storm over, Rescue teams were immediately dispatched to retrieve Jack, Sam, Jason, and all the survivors from the library.
Look it up, boy.
On a historic day, the new president delivered his first national address. Not from the destroyed Washington, D.C., but from Mexico. "We have all sinned," he said, his voice heavy. "We plundered the earth without regard for the consequences. But this disaster has opened humanity's eyes."
There is cause for hope. New York City, against all odds.
And from above, aboard the International Space Station, the astronauts gazed down at Earth in awe. For the first time in generations, the planet's skies were crystal clear. The haze of pollution from factories and the smog from exhaust pipes were gone. The blue marble shone with its former purity. Meanwhile, down below, from other surviving high-rises, small groups of people began to emerge from their shelters, reaching for the sunlight that promised a new beginning for human civilization.